And when I landed at Georgia College down in Milledgeville, I knew I wanted to do psychology as my major. So I got rolling in that. And it just turned out that the head of the psych department and the head of the outdoor ed department were married. And so they did a lot of pushing people into both of these two roles and kind of like courses of study. And so I took a couple of the outdoor ed classes just as, like I liked being outside. I liked, camp. And as I kind of was doing those more as elective courses, I found out that I really loved it and that there were paths of, making money and moving, through life in a career of camp, not just going as a kid. And so I just kind of stuck with that. And I think it's kind of a God thing because my last year of college, I met my husband, Bryce, who works here at Lake Logan now. And he had grown up in the Episcopal Church going to Camp Michael, which was basically Camp Henry for Atlanta. And he had already signed on to go work a year of maintenance at Camp Michael when he finished college. And so long story short, we ended up there for about 5 years after college. And I did the outdoor ed path and he did, the maintenance facilities management path. And that kind of just rolled us into this lifestyle of moving from camp to camp so far and taking care and stewarding the property, that we're living and working at, and then also bringing people into it. So Michael was the first. SOAR, I don't know if any of you guys are familiar, but it's a small camp out of Balsam, but operates all over the country. That's where we were before we found Lake Logan. But interesting fact was when we were leaving Camp Michael, trying to move to North Carolina, I had emailed Ian Williams, the director at the time of Camp Henry, saying, hey, have you guys ever thought about starting an outdoor ed center? Because we really want to live in that area. And we're at Camp Michael now, and it wasn't in the cards at that point. And just happened to see it at the right time. And here we are. So yeah, we love working with the Episcopal Diocese, and we love the outdoors.
So from your experience, it sounds like you've worked a lot with younger folks in your career and all that. And one of the things we were hoping you could address for us today, last week we had High on talking about kind of almost a solo experience in the wilderness. I'm curious, as someone who's been involved in this work with young folks, with kids and teenagers and maybe some young adults, how have you watched wilderness and outdoor programs affect children and youth? Like, what does being in the wilderness do for them that they might not have otherwise encountered?
I think there's a few really important things that the wilderness does, not just for young folks, but we can focus on that. The big thing for me, and maybe it's, the special needs background that I just came out of that's still so fresh for me, but it's confidence. It's putting yourself in a place where you have to build skills, and they're not really hard skills to build, especially if you have a mentor or someone that can teach you. And then once you have those skills, even if you're not an expert, even if you just started your first fire and you used, a lighter instead of flint and steel or whatever, you're building something inside yourself that will come out in other ways throughout your life. It'll show you how capable you are of certain things. And so I think that when it comes to working with kids in the outdoors, that's what I love. I love when they figure out how a compass works after taking the class, and it's really hard and it's kind of confusing, and then they can show someone else, or they do get to start a fire and they feel like they can take care of themselves. And so I think that that's one of my favorite things, is building that confidence. And it's something that's so important for kids. Like how many aspects of your life can you develop skills that way? Maybe you want to be a great athlete, but you're not cut out for it. You can't work hard and be a great athlete. You can work hard and be a great outdoorsman. And so I love that piece of it. And I also just think that, to be, I don't know, I guess it's kind of cliche, but if you look at folks who have famously spent a lot of time in the wilderness, think Edward Abbey, John Muir, in that time that they've spent in the wilderness, you find that everyone comes around to this thought of necessity for the spirit, and I see that in the kids that come out here too. You know, whether or not they feel very connected to their faith when they come to camp, you can see it when they're out there, when we're doing Compline by the fire and everybody is engaged, or we're, you know, in Celebration Hall and getting ready to go on a hike. There's just something about it that makes them feel like they can engage in a way that for some reason they might not be able to when they're so immersed in like their daily typical life.
Well, I mean, speaking of camp, you took this job back in February, and then we had this pandemic happen. I mean, you became the director of Camp Henry and outdoor programming at the most unusual time any of us have experienced. Tell me about what it's like to, it's its own kind of metaphorical wilderness on its own. Tell me about what it's like to start a new job in the middle of a pandemic, having to rethink the way that you're going to do this new job as you're in the midst of it. So, you know, talk a little bit about that and about what camp was like this past year as well for y'all, because I imagine it was a little bit different, and I'm imagining your outdoor programming experience came in really handy.
It did, and I guess starting this new position, that's a good metaphor that I hadn't thought of. It was a wilderness of its own, and there was a lot of discernment that went into it, which I think is a big part of spending time in the wilderness, is kind of discerning what your next move is, discerning what will be the right thing to do. And so that was a huge part of camp this year. It would be, I think, naive for me to just glaze over the fact that a lot of camps canceled, and we considered canceling. There was a lot, you know, at stake, and it was a hard decision to kind of choose one route and move forward on it. And in the end, what we did, for those of you who don't know, is that we dropped all traditional camp sessions, which can house up to 80 kids. You know, that would have been unsafe no matter what. So we dropped all of those sessions and we rethought our Camp Henry Outdoor School. So Camp Henry Outdoor School has been going for years now. And just to give you some background in how it works, is that instead of traditionally, when you think of summer camp, you go and you stay in a cabin and you go to activities, and you know, the day is very scheduled out, where pretty much every day is the same with outdoor activities mixed in. CHOS it's like expedition based, I guess is the right word for it. So you can only take 12 kids max into the wilderness. Mainly, well, it's more fun that way. If you don't have a huge group, you get a better experience, and a lot of permitting. You can't take large groups into backcountry areas. I'm sure if any of you guys hike, you know that if you come across a really big group in the wilderness, it kind of ruins the feel. So we took that premise of CHOS and tried to apply it to regular Camp 2 for kids who weren't really comfortable with the backpacking portion. So CHOS, usually you'd go backpacking for half of the time. There's whitewater rafting, there's rock climbing, which is awesome if you're comfortable with that. And it's really intimidating if you're not there yet. So we took CHOS and we did CHOS and CHOS Light. And the light version was where 12 campers could come at a time also. But they got to stay in our open air cabins that are traditionally the boys' cabins. And all of our activities happened outdoors. So instead of eating in the dining hall, we ate outside on tables that had been set up on, you know, outside of our dining hall, where they could spread out and be, you know, in the open air. We did all of our singing and dancing down in the field, even in the rain, which was kind of cool. And so we kind of mixed a traditional camp into an all outdoor, more expeditionary feel. And so all in all, we served about 80 campers, so way fewer than we would normally. but those campers that came needed it at that time, and so we took the extra precautions that the Department of Health and Human Services had asked that camps take. The ACA is our accrediting body, and they gave us guidance too. And, all said and done.
If you think about that particular time, this was a time when many of us were still kind of sheltering in place and being at home most of the time. To then be able, as a kid, to be outdoors and around even 12 people had to be just this incredible experience for them, especially that they will always remember, because it was the week or 2 weeks where they actually got to see other people.
They'd all been out of school for quite a while, and the kind of unsung heroes I thought in the summer were the counselors. We were able to employ all of the counselors that wanted to come. So there were a lot that wasn't for them. And I really encouraged them to discern that too, whether or not that was something that they wanted to do, because I had to require that they stay on campus. They couldn't go off and have fun in their off time. They had to stay here in quarantine for the kids that were going to come in. So it turned out to be a lot more special than I had thought that it could have been. In fact, we have campers that are like, can we have just 12 kids and do everything outside next year? And it's like, well, yeah, that exists. Take JOS classes. But yeah, it very luckily, and I'm thankful for it, turned out to be a really great experience where we all stayed healthy and were able to keep guidelines on track, and yeah, had a really great time outside.
We've got a couple of questions coming in, and I should have asked this before, but we got a question about what exactly is outdoor education. It's not just education that happens outdoors. So what is outdoor education?
That's a really good question.
Yeah. So let's tackle that one first, and then we'll go to the next one, which is what's available for older folks, non-kids, non-youth, non-young adults, and have you ever thought about having like Camp Henry CHOS for grown-ups?
That's also a good question. So I'll start with outdoor education first, and it's not necessarily new, but it's definitely becoming a more popular option. And so there are several different facets of outdoor ed. So let me think of how I want to say this. So from the educator's standpoint, it is a course study just like education if you were going to be a classroom teacher. So you still learn all of the pieces that you would as a teacher as far as lesson planning and how to interact with students and that sort of thing. The idea of it, though, is that you use nature and outdoor areas to educate in all the different areas that a school would, right? So an outdoor education facility would have classes so typically they have science classes, which is kind of intuitive, but there's also history and social studies. There are things that you can do outside that incorporate different mathematics. And so it's taking that education piece and putting a more holistic spin on it, where you use real life, often outdoor things to teach in a more hands-on way. And then it also is really important to incorporate like local things, so the area that they're in. So here, for example, in the Southeast, we talk a lot about history, Native American history. Here at Lake Logan, we have a lot of great logging industry history that, there's so much that's connected to that. And so really it's kind of taking anything that you would want to teach in the classroom and figuring out a way to teach it hands-on outside, where a lot of campers, a lot of students do maybe better when they can have hands-on, when they can get some of that energy out but still be learning. So that's kind of the concept behind it.
So what would it look like to do outdoor education for older folks, for non-students, for non-kids? What does that look like? And if, say, we had a couple of folks on this Zoom call who thought, I'd like to do more outdoor education for me personally. What would that look like for them? even at Lake Logan?
So Lake Logan has this amazing property. They have amazing facilities. And the one thing that that wasn't going on here was that sort of work. So CHOS was developed long ago, and it was just a camp. And so something that was a piece of what I was hired to do here at Lake Logan, and for the diocese in other places, it doesn't have to happen here, is to develop a center where we can start doing those types of classes. So, looking at doing classes for schools, looking at doing classes for churches, youth groups, community groups. So it's not exclusive to kids. It's all about, lifelong learning. If it's a skill that you don't have, take a class. One of the things that David had kind of prompted me with when I was thinking about coming on was kind of talking about, what would that look like? What would it be like to have other folks come out here? And we are offering classes now, although it's harder because, with COVID, you have to do very small groups. And so if you want to learn to, let's see, can someone throw out something that they would like to learn?
Maybe orienteering.
Orienteering, yeah. That's so there are several classes that I have listed on the website. So if you wanted to learn to orienteer, you would just want to call me and we could figure out, kind of what would the group size be? Would it just be you? And I'm scheduling just like smaller group classes, and we're making them very individualistic. So for example, and again, this was a kids group, but it could have just as easily been adults. I had a group from Atlanta that wanted to come up and do the Alpine Tower. It's a wilderness club that was created from a defunct Boy Scout group. And they did our Alpine Tower. We learned how to stay safe on hikes. So just kind of basic hiking etiquette, basic hiking safety, and some basic identification of plants in the surrounding area. And really what they did was they just contacted me. They said, hey, here are some things that we feel like the boys need to know. Their Boy Scout troop isn't really doing this. And so what can we put together? And we put together just a 2-day course where we kind of incorporated fire building and archery for some fun. And so it's really, there's a lot of different things that we can do here. They are listed on our website now under the CHOS dropdown. So Lake Logan, Camp Henry, CHOS, Camp Henry Outdoor School. And you can see all the things that I'm equipped to teach right now with the staff out here. And all it takes is just contacting me and saying, hey, here's what I want to learn. Here's how much time I have, and we'll figure it out. That's the other beautiful piece about outdoor education, is that there's so much holistic intertwining that you can kind of create an experience, and it doesn't have to be chopped up like some classes would have to be.
Well, so since this is kind of part of our chance to also get to know you as our new Camp Henry director, I'd love to talk and hear from you, since this is our theme about spirituality in the wilderness, about how you have experienced the wilderness as a spiritual place, how it maybe has changed you or impacted you as a person of faith. And so just curious, in your years in the outdoors, what has that been like for you? What does that look like for you?
I feel, well, my husband and I joke that the backcountry is our church. In moving around so much and, never really finding a church before now, that's kind of been where we go. And like I kind of touched on earlier with John Muir and Edward Abbey, and like you had mentioned, David, just all of the different times that wilderness pops up in Scripture. There's something about being in creation that makes you feel the most connected. And so that's kind of, I think, whenever I am needing to feel grounded or needing that connection, or needing to find like the right path on something, that is where I go to find it. And I think that was just kind of innate, but it doesn't have to be if that hasn't been innate for somebody. I think that they can find that there too.
I've always found it fascinating that, when you get to one of these big overlooks, even at some of the more crowded trailheads, when you get to this big grand overlook, people enter that space and they begin to whisper, almost like they would when they're at a church. You get to the top of the mountain and everybody starts whispering, and it becomes this almost sacred space that you share.
That's so true.
And you wonder. I mean, there's so much wonder when you get. I love hiking to the top of Looking Glass Mountain because there's a secret trail by the helipad that goes to a different lookout that not as many people know about, and it's this wonderful space. And then but you're talking and you're having fun with your kids or your spouse or your friends, and then you crest the top and you just get quiet, just like you're walking into a church in some way. So I totally get that feeling of how the trail, how the wilderness can be this kind of sacred space. Mm-hmm. Wilderness, as we were talking about, it is this special place in Scripture. So, you try to count up all the different ways that God's people have been in the wilderness. So you've got the Israelites, you've got the prophets, and also Jesus, after his baptism, goes out into the wilderness, and it's kind of this moment of identity for him in a way. So as you go into the wilderness, as you lead kids into the wilderness, do you see it changing their perspective on themselves? Do they come out of the wilderness thinking about themselves differently in some cases?
Yes, and a few different ways. I think that one of my favorites I already mentioned was seeing that confidence grow, and I love that, and I think it's really special. But the other thing that, in my experience, is with small groups of kids and seeing the community that they build. It is very church-like in that too. You come together and you have these experiences, you have these discussions in this small group where there aren't any distractions, and it's a safe place to say, oh my gosh, did you see this thing over here? Or just sit and listen. And I love that. And how many times, if you have kids, did they sit around a campfire silently, just listening, and how much like a church service is that, whether they know it or not, whether they're actively praying, you can see it on their faces that there's something happening inside, when we have those quiet moments out, and even unprompted. Like I said, like at a campfire, you don't say, all right, now we're going to have a moment of silence, and I want you to, reflect on this. It seems to happen more innately in that setting. And it's beautiful. And I feel it too as an adult. I'll find myself sitting and pondering and then thinking, oh, I was just praying and I didn't even realize it. I wasn't actively doing it. It just came. And I think that's something really special about being in raw creation.
It just kind of comes out of you, kind of the gratitude and the things and the wonder in the midst of all that. For me, I was a Camp Henry Outdoor School chaplain a couple of years ago, which was great fun. But one of the things that I noticed was that I was in a middle school group, and our middle schoolers wanted to be tough and they wanted to know everything. And then they were put in these really new and unusual situations, and it got them a little uncomfortable, and it got them vulnerable. And that kind of vulnerability seemed to kind of open them up. So, it just felt like they got deeper in touch with themselves and each other, and were more likely to be themselves. It's such a neat experience doing that.
I think that is what makes it so interesting, is that when you leave all the things that you are so familiar with and come second nature, and there's anything that you want to distract yourself with, it's at the end of your fingertips, and you go into a scenario where there's not that much to do when you think of what kids usually like to do. And most of the things that you're doing are survival based, and you might play in the water, but really all there is survival based activities, reflection, conversation, and then simple games, right? And that's such like a beautiful and simple way to live that our kids don't get to live in often.
Well, it's 10:04. I want to give space for questions for folks. So if you've got questions for Jessi, please put them in the comments or unmute yourself and speak up. As we're doing that, I would love, there's one question we've already got in, and then there's another question I would like to ask. But one of the questions is, how have you incorporated your background in psychology and growth in spirituality into your teaching? And I kind of want to know from you, as someone who's been in the wilderness a lot, what's your best wilderness story? So answer the question about psychology and spirituality, because that's a deep and intelligent question. Then you can answer the fun one later.
Okay. I want to just hear the wording one more time.
How have you incorporated both your background in psychology and growth in spirituality in your teaching? So kind of where's that connection between psychology and growth in spirituality and how you teach?
So psychology has always interested me, and it's a really big part of kind of my background. And really, I think that it mainly just prepared me well to work with kids at this point. So I've had a lot of training in working with diverse neuroatypical kids. And so kids on the spectrum, kids with ADHD. And in doing that, you kind of just gain a lot larger understanding of how to connect. And because you have such a limited amount of time at camp, being able to connect deeply without, having to build as much or like figure things out has been really, I think, useful. And so really, I just think that is the best way to then bring in spirituality, to then get to tap into, working with youth that, maybe haven't tapped into their spirituality yet. And I wouldn't say that I am the most spiritual person. I'm still on that journey. And so getting to work with the kids and see them grow in it. And especially, David, you mentioned that you were a chaplain. Like, that's why we have chaplains, is so that I can grow and learn a lot from the kids. It's kind of a very cyclical thing when it comes to working with people and learning personalities and seeing what's important to them, and then seeing that in myself. And then you kind of start the whole cycle over again. So I think that they all go really hand in hand. I don't know if that answered the question.
I think it's wonderful. That's great. That's great. So do you have a favorite wilderness story of your own? Do you have one when you think about the wilderness and your experiences in it, where you go, this pretty much is the one I like to tell around the campfire or around the dinner table?
Gosh, I have a few, but so at Camp Michael, we had something that was called outdoor camp, which was CHOS. It was the exact same setup. Everything that we do here at Camp Henry, they did as well for their outdoor camp. And on one of our backpacking trips, you carry your food and you carry your gear, and everything is very much a burden. And so as you're eating, you're trying to, eat all the food so that you don't have to carry anything out. And you're trying to make sure that you take just what you need. And at one of the campsites in the creek, the kids found this giant tin of, some sort of canned meat. And it'd been in the creek for who knows how long. There was no expiration date still visible. There was no like paper outside thing.
It was true mystery meat.
It was true mystery meat. And from then on, every conversation, every, faith formation session, there was some connection to this giant can of meat that they couldn't leave there. And so in a setting where they are already complaining about how heavy everything is, they're carrying out for miles and miles this giant can of meat. It turned out to be tuna, but just how much when they opened it up. But yeah, it was just really
when they were off trail, not when they were on trail.
We got off trail, so they carried it for days.
I thought you were
someone worked it into, like faith and carrying this thing, and believing that they were going to, all these different things that they worked into their faith formation. And then they got back and opened up this giant can of stinky tuna. So I really enjoyed that. But I also got
I really thought you were about to tell us that they opened it up and ate it before you could stop them, and then it was going to be a long journey home afterwards. So
They might have if it hadn't been tuna, but I mean, it's
But-
like they opened it up and they're like, oh.
much happier ending.
Yeah, it was a fun experience.
Are there other questions that we have today? We've got about 3 or 4 more minutes for questions. I'm sure that if anybody has kids or grandkids out there, when does registration open for camp this summer, and what might it look like this summer?
Oh, good question. So registration is open. We opened it in October, as we normally would, but because we have no way of knowing what the summer is going to look like, we're having to be cautiously optimistic. So right now we've opened registration at half capacity for each of the camps. And we'll know more about kind of what, if there's a vaccine that changes things, if they're, so really we have to wait and see what the landscape is going to look like when it comes to how many kids we're going to have here and what the format for camp will be. But right now we're expecting that we'll be able to definitely use our open air cabins, which are just screened in. We always have the fallback of having the great open but covered outdoor dining hall area. So worst case scenario is that camp very much looks like it did this past summer, where we do everything outside, but we're able to have hopefully a few more than 12 campers at a time. Depending on what the regulations from the Department of Health and Human Services are, we'll pretty much follow those verbatim. We didn't come up with anything new on our own or discard anything this past summer, and we won't do that this summer. And so kind of how that process has worked in the one time that we've had to do it is that I'm part of the North Carolina Youth Camp Association, and we keep in really close contact with, the governor's office, with the Department of Health and Human Services. And so we kind of discern what needs to happen, put it into place, make it the common practice, and then disseminate it to the public. And the diocesan office will do that as it did this past summer. So if something has to change, that's how it'll get out to everybody. But I very much am hopeful in that it looks like we will be able to do smaller camps in this, that's the beauty of camp to begin with, is it's mostly outside. And so we'll see as it goes on, but we're looking at just doing half capacity, maybe 3/4 capacity, and carrying on according to whatever the standards are.
Well, Jessi, thank you so much for being with us today. It was wonderful to hear about your experiences in the wilderness and camp. It's wonderful to hear about how the beloved tradition of Camp Henry is going to continue to go on even in the pandemic, and all the new things that you're bringing to Camp Henry, to the outdoor programming. We're so grateful that you're one of us now. We're so grateful that you know Trinity now, because if there, I'm biased, but if there's one church you need to know in this diocese, it's ours. I am biased. Don't tell the bishop or anybody else.
I do know more of you guys than anyone else, to be honest.
I mean, it's important.
You're very active out here.
We do. We love Lake Logan, and we're grateful for you being a part of the Lake Logan and Camp Henry family.
Well, also, if I might,
Yeah.
We've also been very involved at Camp Henry, so for many years. So, and thank you, because I think one thing that's important to kind of reflect on is that as our culture has changed rapidly, I mean, many of us on this call, I know a number of us kind of, when we were younger, it wasn't so hard to get to church every single Sunday and to get Sunday school every single Sunday. And now camps have become such an integral part of the overall kind of faith formation of our young people, especially middle and high school, because it has become difficult to have a schedule that allows our middle and high school kids to be present here at church every single Sunday for faith formation and so on and so forth. So I just want to affirm and lift up the truth that I think camp experiences in the summer have become an integral part of how we help to shape faith formation for our young people. And Camp Henry is not, you know, as you might find even in Western North Carolina, a camp where it says it has a religious connection, but that, you know, is pretty much grace at the beginning of a meal and the end of a meal. I mean, as David was saying, we have clergy who are chaplains, who are, you know, spend, you know, who help with you, I'm sure, help shape the faith formation of these experiences, which is profound. So thank you.
Thank you guys. And please don't hesitate to email me if you do want to come out and, you know, have a tour or take a class. I'm very much developing the program right now for outdoor ed here at Lake Logan. And you all could be my guinea pigs or, or help with those classes, you know, if you have a background that you'd like to, you know, contribute. So thank you guys so much for having me on. It's been nice to see and meet everybody.
Thank
and
you.
it's good to see everybody. Please remember our service starts at 10:45 on YouTube and Facebook, and there will be a very special guest who arrives at a certain point in the service. So tune in and enjoy yourselves and worship with us. We thank you so much, and we'll see you next week. Thank you so much, y'all. We'll see you later. God bless.
Bye.